That's the end of public input. We go to local board, and there is no local board appearing before us today. Item 7, extraordinary items, none that are known of, which brings us to item 8, is the first substantive matter on the agenda, which is an update on the preparatory work for the Auckland Integrated Transport Plan. And we'll invite the team up for this. I have Robert and Amanda, and Robert, I'll leave you to do any other introductions that are required there. And we've got a presentation that is also available online. Welcome.
Thanks, Mark. Kia ora koutou. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, some of you will remember Amanda Harland, who is Council's lead growth advisor and has been working elsewhere for the last year or two. Has now returned to Council. And on my left is Harry Stovold, who is a transport advisor in Council's transport strategy team. And one of the leading lights in the technical high-level assessment that we've undertaken that we're about to tell you about. And of course, you know Mark from Auckland Transport. So this is a monthly update that we're giving you on the Integrated Transport Plan. We've appeared in front of you, I think this is our March, April, May, June, 4th month in a row now. And no doubt there'll be more to come as well. So just a very quick recap around the purpose of this work, which, sorry, just get my notes, is to deliver on the scope that was agreed by the Transport Committee back in March to help Council develop a medium to long-term view of its future transport network right across all the different modes. So the purpose of this work, of course, is to inform our pending discussions with central government on the actual Auckland Integrated Transport Plan. And we'll have recommendations for you as to how we think that next stage should proceed. We'll have those recommendations as part of this work. This work has been a collaboration between Auckland Transport and ourselves, and today's update is focusing on the assessment process, which we've been busy with over the last couple of weeks. And in fact, that's a really pivotal part of the entire thing. It's probably the central aspect of it all. And also, you've got in your package some maps, which Amanda, as our lead growth advisor in Council, will talk you through. Of course, just reiterating the point that I've made in previous appearances here, and that this is running in parallel to the statutory planning process, which is, of course, the regional RLTP. They are not the same, they are different. So, launching into the assessment process. So, over the last 2 to 3 weeks, a small team of Auckland Transport and Auckland Council staff have spent a great many hours, 30 plus hours, in workshops assessing a large list, more than 50 large projects. This has been augmented by various moderation sessions. The projects that we've assessed, as you'll soon see from the list, have drawn entirely from existing plans. So we haven't made anything new up. We've had to draw, that's not within scope, and certainly not within timeframes that we've had either. So we have considered only those things that are in existing plans from the different agencies. The work includes a high-level view on cost of delivery, which is very high, and likely funding available, which is less high, over a 30-year period, extrapolating from existing settings. As I say, we've had several moderation sessions, some of them on specific issues around land use, and in particular Māori outcomes. Fair to say that we haven't landed that one yet. We've been having conversations with staff from Ngā Matarai, the Council's Māori advisory team, AT's Māori advisory team, and people from the Hokura Hokura Secretariat, to consider how we can better integrate Māori outcomes into this and perhaps potentially highlight them through some maps specific to Māori outcomes. And as I say, it's fair to say we haven't quite landed this yet. We brought everyone together in a hui last week, which was very useful. We've got another one next week, and no doubt there'll be some after that as well. So, the criteria that we used, the column on the left is the outcomes that we brought to you last month, and I said at the time that there needs to be a level of detail sitting below that to enable proper assessment, and those are those dimensions on the right. So we went through and scored at a high level projects based on those dimensions that you see there on the right. Reminder of the criteria for project inclusion in this assessment, which we talked about last month as well. So in keeping with the scope of the work, only projects of significant scale, strategic importance have been assessed. So what that means in practice, generally speaking, is that only projects of $1 billion or more estimated costs have been included, except where a smaller project is identified as a significant interdependency for a larger project. We haven't assessed things that are already well underway, like the CRL, for example. That's taken as a given. And just to reiterate the point that we discussed at length, I think, in the last tick, is that this doesn't mean that the smaller projects are important. Quite the opposite, in fact, as you'll see from one of the subsequent slides. It's just that they don't fall within the scope of this assessment. They will be a critical part of the future network, and this is dealt with through the current and future RLTPs. So this is what I'm sure you're all interested in, the list of projects that we have assessed. And as I say, these were all drawn from existing plans from the various agencies. There's a huge variability in terms of how developed work on each of them is, in terms of how much data is available, in terms of the timeliness of that data. So if we look at the heavy rail column, these projects were drawn from the Auckland Rail PBC. That's Kiwi Rail's Auckland Rail PBC. PBC, Program Business Case. State highway projects have come from the GPS and from Waka Kotahi's various plans. Column on the right, SGA, is the Supporting Growth Alliance. Unfortunately, I think this slide is, the deck of slides up there is a slightly earlier version. Never mind. That's the work undertaken by an alliance of various agencies and private sector players looking at what transport projects are needed to deliver on Auckland's growth plans, particularly it has a particular greenfield focus, but not exclusively so. And also in that same category, we looked at the AHP, Auckland Housing Program, Kaingora's Auckland Housing Program, and the transport investments, the package of transport investments required there. Moving on to rapid transit network projects, you can see there are a large number of them, all drawn from existing plans again. For some of the largest plans, projects, for example, City Centre to Mangere Corridor and the Waitemata Harbour Crossing, we've been able to split those into separate parts to enable consideration of each of them individually. And some other public transport projects as well that don't fit the criteria for rapid transit. Just dwell on this slide a little bit. So I must emphasise that the assessment that we've undertaken so far is it's draft, it's high level. We haven't finalised it yet. We will be sharing it with you at the next session, which is 2 weeks from now, the workshop. The real value of this work, and we think it's been very valuable, was, as far as we're aware, this has not been done before in terms of bringing together all the various plans of the various agencies, putting them all together and considering them holistically. I think you'll see when we share the results with you the value of that exercise. We think there's a need for a next stage of work, whether it's with central government or not, which will, where we're under less time pressure and we can do a even more robust job of the assessment and consider things that have fallen outside of scope for this particular piece of work as well. And as I say, we will have recommendations for what that next phase of work might look like when we present you the final version of this part of the work. So, some of the emerging findings so far. It will come as no surprise to you that there is a very large gap between the combined cost of all the various investments and the likely funding availability. We're still nailing down these numbers, so I won't give you a particular number at this point, but that gap is likely to be many tens of billions, if not more, over a 30-year period. Given that, there are some key issues that we need to give consideration to for future processes and in the way we think about transport more generally. So many of these projects, of course, are developed in isolation of each other. And as I say, the value of this work is trying to bring it all together. In being developed in isolation of each other, it means that there are a number of projects that essentially serve quite similar purposes, and they won't all need to be delivered, but they have been developed independently of each other. And generally with projects, as I say, of this nature being developed independently, that tends to encourage or result in at least scope creep and the resulting cost escalation that comes along with that. So as I say, this is the first attempt at bringing it all together, and there's a lot more work needed to try and make sense of it all and prioritise the different projects. Alternative funding sources are going to be increasingly important. The government's flagged that in the GPS. It certainly won't plug all of this gap, but it will help make a dent in it. I'll come back to that third point. I've got a point there around integration of land use and transport planning. Of course, we strive to do that, but it's become evident that some of the way in which growth is envisaged, and this is made worse by unanticipated plan changes that we can't do much about. The way that growth is envisaged, particularly in greenfield areas, will place a very big strain on the public purse and requiring some really costly projects to deliver that generally, but not always speaking, compared to projects in the existing urban area, have a more limited range of benefits. So we need to get much better at that, I think. And also, a lot of the problems are beyond council's control, as I say, in terms of unanticipated plan changes. This is really an issue for council that we need to get to grips with and potentially increase our advocacy for central government for change in this area. And the final sub-bullet point I've got there is around for the need for supporting changes to the regulatory framework, to the way in which transport is planned and funded, and we've got work streams on this that will bring the results to you in due course. So even with all those kind of considerations of key issues that were flagged there, it's pretty evident that we simply won't be able to deliver all of these projects over a 30-year period of time. And in some cases that's fine because some are alternatives to each other. But nevertheless, there will still be a number of highly valued projects, each of which will have their own constituency, that we simply won't be able to deliver unless there's some kind of step change in funding availability. So trade-offs will be required, and this work will assist you over time helping to make those trade-offs. So we need to do things differently, which brings me back to that third sub-bullet point there, and to an earlier point that I started making around the need to refocus on some of the higher value, smaller investments, both in terms of how they get the most out of the higher priority big investments, large projects that we will need to deliver, but also in terms of getting the most out of the existing transport network. Because whatever the number comes out at in terms of the combined costs of these large projects, it will be a much smaller number than the value of our existing network. Hence the need to leverage investment to get the most out of that investment that we've made over many decades. So I think that is a summary of the key emerging findings at this point, and we can go into that in more detail during the workshop and of course during subsequent public sessions as well. So I'll just hand over to Amanda now, who will talk about the map.
Thanks, Rob. So I'm just going to quickly overview the maps that you will have seen attached to the agenda item. The project assessment process considered where and when growth occurs together with Council's long-term strategy for growth. As you will be aware, the Future Development Strategy was adopted at the end of last year. So to support the assessment, we produced maps showing population and employment growth trends, past and future, and the Auckland Future Development Strategy 2023-2053 as a combined map. The Future Development Strategy has the high-level, prioritised areas for growth across separate maps. And this map tries to bring them all together in one place so you can start to see patterns for where growth is anticipated to occur over the next 30 years. Just to highlight the population and employment trends, key features. More growth happened in the urban south and along the rapid transit network in the south and the west. Future urban locations reflecting live zoning were a feature, and either through the live zoning was either through private plan changes, as Rob has already mentioned, or decisions to the unitary plan. Less growth occurred in the isthmus and the urban north, and higher levels of employment growth were seen in the southern industrial areas. They are our largest business zones, and some areas in the north, such as Albany and Silverdale. In terms of forecast growth, we see growth emerging across a wider area in the central isthmus, reflecting current and indicative future investment in rapid transit, especially for the city centre to Mangere Corridor and the northwest and eastern rail line. Future urban areas feature more prominently, and we've already mentioned that in terms of live zoning across all those future urban locations. It also reflects the prioritisation in the future development strategy for those future urban areas. And employment intensifies in those large existing business areas and emerges in new peripheral locations to support growth in those future urban areas, as well as intensified business areas across the existing urban area. And lastly, the future development strategy map. So as I said, this map represents an overall 30-year view of prioritised locations identified in the future development strategy for urban development. It has the existing transport network, obviously purposely for the purpose of this process. It doesn't have any indicative future projects at this stage. A key consideration, we think, is for this process is for the integrated transport plan to have a good understanding of the relationship between the type and location of growth anticipated and the transport investment required to support that growth. And we intend to simplify this map to use as a base for showing the 30-year view for the transport projects, and that will help to highlight how the key growth areas and corridors can be connected through critical transport investment. Thanks. I think these slides haven't been updated. Apologies about that.
Okay. I think you might press the wrong button. Right, thanks, Amanda. So just to wrap up, thanks. Right, so as we say, there is a workshop on the 19th of June for your initial consideration of assessment results, which will come to public forum soon thereafter. Future meetings of a tick. There's some of the things that we'd be like to focus on, including project prioritisation, which is obviously going to be falling out of that high-level assessment, which is obviously going to be very important, and importantly showing it on spatially on a map overlaid with growth and land use type considerations. Maori outcomes, I mentioned that before. We will have more to say on that in the future. And also there's another bullet point I should have added, really important, working with AT on how we think the next phase of work should look like, which we think is very much needed. And ideally that will be with central government. But even if government doesn't come to the party, then there's still a lot of value in AT and ourselves working together to flesh some of the issues that we're going to identify in this initial phase, to flesh it out a bit more. And there is the map that Amanda was speaking to. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks for that. I'll open up to questions now. First question, Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora, thank you. It's working. The question I had was around level crossings, and obviously, you know, that's you've got that on the list there in terms of Southern Line and Western Line, massive potential investment required there. One of the things that thinking about this is that a lot of the commentary we have is focused on the safety aspects, and while it's really important we do that, there's also an argument here around the efficiency of the transport system more broadly, and the need to, I think that will help us to make the case to central government around this. So just wanting to make sure that we're capturing that impact, you know, issues like, say, the Woodward crossing where, you know, the traffic will be held up while trains go through and stuff like that. Obviously, the safety aspect is important. I think that other aspect will potentially be a big selling point too. So how are we reflecting that? And then I've just got a follow-up question about timing.
Yes, I think our criteria does capture that. But Harry, if you've got anything you want to add to that detail-wise, please do.
Yeah, we've assessed or in the process of assessing a wide range of dimensions, which I believe was in the slides Rob presented. So for all the projects, but you know, including level crossings, the things we're assessing are much broader than safety. There's factors like resilience, the impact on the freight network, and travel time and congestion, which kind of all get at those broader benefits of those projects. So that definitely is part of the work. It's not just identifying the main single reason that you might do one of these projects, but it is looking at the kind of broader impacts across that wide range of dimensions.
Great. And so just a question about timing. So we're having a workshop on this on the 19th of June, but the level crossing workshop, which elected members have been asking for quite a long time, we're not having that until the 26th of June. So I'm just a little bit worried about those two things potentially being out of sync. So I don't expect we resolve that in the meeting now, but it would be, I think, helpful to have a think about how those two things interact. Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Made note of that. Councillor Walker.
Sure. In respect of the list of projects you've got, have you got a project around what might be called smart transport? And that is particularly around making the existing network much more efficient through the use of intelligent intersections and so on. And that goes to the movement of not just vehicles, but pedestrians, cyclists, and so on. And I'm referring to technology that's already in play in other cities.
So, Councillor, as I mentioned, we can only deal with projects that are already existing and already have a reasonable level of development that are sitting in the various plans of various agencies. So we're not aware of a project along those lines that we could have assessed. And as I say, we don't have the scope or the time to be able to start afresh with something reasonably new. That said, of course, Auckland Transport has all sorts of programs to improve the efficiency of the transport network along the lines you're suggesting. It's likely that none of them are necessarily of sufficient scope, sufficient size to be assessed through this type of process. But again, you know, the next phase of work where we're dealing with this in a more detailed and less time-pressured way, you know, at your direction, that is something that we can potentially look into.
Okay, the other question I've got through you, Mr. Chair, is in respect of the disruptive effect that's starting in other cities from the introduction of full self-drive and the application of artificial intelligence, the introduction of cybercabs. This is now about, if it hasn't started already, rolling out in other cities overseas. And clearly there are significant economic impacts where the cost of dialing up or hailing a driverless vehicle is cheaper than public transport. So is this something that you're looking at in respect of its impact on the projects that you're evaluating? And if I can just bolt on a question related to my earlier question, and that is that if the impact of efficiency is significant and it builds on existing technology and other cities are deploying it with success, why aren't we including it? Because it could well be a lot cheaper than many of the other things you're suggesting. So two related questions there. Thank you.
I think, Councillor, that the answer to your first question is probably very similar to the answer to these two questions as well. It's not really in the scope for this particular phase of the work and the particular type of projects that we've been asked to look at. We have to deal with the information that we have in front of us. You know, and you'll see one of the assessment criteria is around, oh, we do have this up here now, okay. Around economic growth and productivity, travel time and congestion. So, you know, where business cases and existing material for projects talks about that in the way that you're envisaging it, then yes, we have taken that into account. But again, it's not a standalone thing that we can assess as part of this phase of the work.
Right, we've got
So when do we consider these things?
Well, as I said, you know, if the direction of this committee is to do something specific on that as part of the next phase of the work, or indeed as part of a completely separate piece of work, then that's what we'll do. But it's just not in scope for this particular phase.
got a follow-up question along the same lines as Councillor Walker, I think, from Mayor Brown.
Okay, thanks for this and thanks for getting on with it. And it does shock me that this is so overdue, your statement earlier on that it's never been done before to look at everything we're doing, and so, which is horrific. But I think with regard to what Councillor Walker was saying, they may not be specific. What I don't want to have happen here is that we write scopes and we have these processes for doing things, and somehow or other that mucks it up. You've come up with a very good finding, which is no great surprise, that the promises are way exceed the amount of money to pay for them. But you should make decisions all the way through in the knowledge that we will be doing braining up the system. It'll be a whole lot of small individual things, but we will look at the fact that it is inevitable we will be braining up the system. I just won't allow AT to carry on without braining up the system. And it's inevitable we will be using time of use charge regardless of what various shopkeepers might think about it. We will be doing these things and they will have an impact on these big projects. And that's the thing. That's where it is. So it may not be that you have to consider that as an individual project, but when you are looking at some of them quite absurd, politically driven suggestions for billions of dollars of expenditure, we'll be saying, well, by the time that gets around to that, we will have sped up the traffic a lot. We will have lights that recognise that no one's actually crossing while you're all waiting around for an invisible person to do these things. So my point is, please, will you do that? Will you assume these things are happening while you're making these? They're not projects in themselves, but it's just like you're assuming there'll be more electric cars. We'll assume we will have a brighter system of things and assume we will have time of use charging. That's my point. Is that okay?
So I think we have done that.
Oh, good.
In that we assume the RLTP will be delivered, and it has a bunch of stuff in there. And
They're not individual projects, I
No,
agree with
that-
you, but you have to assume that
That's
they
right.
will be there.
And it also goes to some of the other points I was making in terms of emerging findings. That what is evident from all this is that we do need to focus on those smaller investments that often, not always, give us bigger bang for buck, along the lines of what you're talking about, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thanks for that. I think what we're hearing here, Robert, is the desire that in amongst all this, and there might be a chance to pick it up at the workshop, that there's a merit, I think, to be gained from trying to see what conceivably could be happening, and not necessarily on a project basis, but in the suite of changes that could be occurring, that are already occurring in other parts of the world, that will inevitably come here in some shape or form. So perhaps trying to keep abreast of potential technological changes, which of course are going to affect everything else. But I think we probably can work that out in a little more detail in the workshop, but it's a good point. Okay, Councillor Filipina and then Councillor Fletcher.
Morena, Chair, thank you. And also morena to Robert, Amanda, Harrod and Mark. Look, my question is around the list of provisionally assessed projects number 2. Do we have a time frame? I know this particular plan is over 30 years, but do we have a time frame for some of those projects under number 2?
So many of these projects will, and in their development, will of course have timeframes attached to them. Our job will be to offer up some form of prioritisation resulting out of our high-level assessment. Ideally, it would include phasing, or even if it's decade 1, decade 2, decade 3 type thing. It's probably unlikely that we're going to be able to do that in the next couple of weeks, which is essentially what we would have to do to deliver something meaningful for you by the time we get this phase of the work done. But certainly, in the second phase of the work, phasing is going to be critical if we can't get to it in this first phase.
Thanks, Robert. Do you know where the Botany to Airport project is with Waka Kotahi?
Thanks, Councillor. There are a few different phases to that project, or horizons, I think is the way Waka Kotahi is referring to it. So I understand Horizon 2 is been put forward in the RLTP, or at least Horizon 2 has been put forward and will be considered through that statutory process. So then, depending on the outcome of that, the further phases would follow on from that. I'm aware of the phasing that was put forward in the business case, but that information, I'm not sure if that's still accurate because that was from a few years ago. But it is definitely a highly phased project.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 more very quick questions. Are you aware of any alternative transport options that have come to this committee for that particular project, Botany to Airport?
Thank you, Councillor. If you're referring to things like Doppelmayr and other modes, those will be fed into the next stage of the NZTA process around that evaluation. So yes, we are aware.
Okay. The last question is therefore then, Mark, are you saying that that particular one, because it was specific that came to this committee, that particular one will be assessed with options for the Botany to Airport? I know there's an item 10 that mentions Doppelmayr, but all it's got is that it gets referred to Waka Kotahi. So are you saying that it'll be part of this plan?
I think what we're saying is that the different modes, such as double mile, will need to be considered as part of specific projects, as part of that business case process that either AT, Council or NZTA or combined of will go through. Double mile is not a specific line item in this plan because it would be a whole new project which is not part of that scope. It needs to be considered as part of existing projects that are looking at addressing outcomes and in that particular part of the region.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak to this particular item and just thank you so much to the team. Kia ora.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Filipaina. So we'll look to finish off the questions now and open it up if there is any debate, and that we finish with Councillor Fletcher and Councillor Henderson.
I certainly welcome this body of work because when you're looking at major infrastructure projects, you need to take a 30-year horizon, but I don't want to get into any of the specifics. And the Mayor has touched on already perhaps the question I have for you. But in terms of your early conclusions, obviously there is an enormous funding gap. The second thing you've weighted in the material you've put to us today is the difficulty of private plan changes and how that can skew things. But I'm interested in what your specific findings are around the legislatively mandated duplications in decision making that are potentially barriers going forward, and how, given that the plan reports to this committee, whether that in turn is going to make or help make the case for advocacy to central government over any potential legislative changes that might be necessary. So to what degree should we be putting weighting on that duplication that we have, and how, if that is not addressed, how that potentially could be a barrier for advancing this work into the future? And as I say, I'm not wanting to do a deep dive into any of the weeds on any of the specific projects or anything of that kind. I simply want to know how we can create the right framework to be able to advance this piece of work.
That's an excellent question, and if we consider the previous ATAPs, for example, where we agreed at a high level between the different agencies at staff level, and then between the politicians on both central and local government, a 10-year plan. ATAP was not statutory, neither is this. And then ATAP, despite government insurances, was then, of course, relitigated every step of the way. Unless this kind of process gets some more a more formal status, then we run that same risk again. Of course, if central government engages with us in the next round of the work, then that's great. It does give it a bit more status, but experience tells us in the past that alone is not sufficient. So the local bill that you all worked on last year does set out some proposal to try to address that kind of issue, and it is critical. It is critical because we make high-level decisions and then we relitigate them through lower-level processes, which don't always align with the intent from the high-level decisions.
Thank you for that answer, Robert. So what you're really telling us, unless we get that legislative change, this is just going to add to the plethora of plans that are out there.
I don't think I'd choose those words, but I think it would certainly some form of change that gave processes like this teeth would be very helpful, no doubt.
Thank you.
Finally, Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I really admire your work. Thanks for it. When you're doing a focus on the high cost CapEx stuff, what we don't kind of see so much is the active mode projects. And I agree with your view on the small improvements that can produce bang for buck. So I'm just wondering if you considered things like including a program to join the gaps in the cycle network across Auckland as one collective effort with a price tag attached.
No, we didn't, although we consider a project like that to be critical, or program, I should say, but it doesn't meet the criteria that we have set for this, although we have, you know, been given direction for this particular piece of work. But you know, through RLTPs and other processes, we assume that will be advanced and hopefully at a much accelerated pace than has been the case in the past.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So thank you, folk, for your presentation. So you can retreat to the safety of the gallery now. It will be moved by the Mayor and seconded by Councillor Fletcher, and Councillor Filipaina would like to address this item. Over to you, Alf.
Thank you, Chair. Look, the reason I asked about the Botany to Airport project is because I've been involved with it along with the previous Manukau councillors for many, many years. And the issue that I have is that there's a specific submission that came through, not only from Double Mayor, but also if we have a look at, there were two particular submissions that came through. And for me, from my perspective anyway, the one from Transit Next, I know that in item 10, it's got to be more information from Transit Next to be provided next month. This particular plan is a 30-year plan. And I mean, now we don't know where the airport to Botany to Airport is situated. I just think that just leaving Doppelmayr to sort of let's assess them against other modes when they were specifically for the airport to Botany. I don't want to lose that chance. Chair, I look forward to the workshop, but I just think that with item 10, I won't speak to that, but it was just seems as if there's been a duck shove here. Just sent it through to NZTA, which disappoints me a little bit because I know that Doppelmayr were not contacted to sort of have an input in regards to the report. So for me, it is the 30-year plan. I just do not want the airport to Botany to Airport to end up falling again way behind and in 10-year blocks. So thank you, Chair. Kia ora.
Thank you, Councillor Filipaina. Councillor Walker.
Sure, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. As much and all as I've heard some answers, I have a major concern that the impact of rapidly increasing technologies is not being taken into account. So the introduction of full self-drive and far more intelligent transport has been likened to the shift from horse-drawn carriages to motor vehicles. It's that disruptive and it's incredibly imminent. I also have a concern that more intelligent intersection technology is not being looked at. There is an existing budget there. There are existing technologies that we're using that will be rapidly displaced. The impact of these things is nothing short of substantial. And as much and all as we hear that it's not in scope, effectively it is in scope because these are decisions that private people will make in respect of their investment decisions around where they travel, their investment in what sort of vehicle they use, and the investment of a range of companies that are significant players. So I have a major concern here that as a city, we appear to be completely missing the bus. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Councillor Henderson.
Thanks. A couple of things, and thank you, Chair. Look, I really support this work. I'm I'm glad we have a process to really assess the large-scale projects that in a lot of cases have been debated around the barbecues of Auckland for decades, and it sort of reminds me of a few other projects we've embarked upon in this term. We need to give, clear guidance to Aucklanders on all of the stuff in this list and probably more besides, so that's great work. Look, I did, and it leads to my questioning, I did notice a contradiction between advice that we need low-cost, smaller-scale improvements that can really make a huge difference and a huge bang for our buck in a process we're assessing very large projects. So that's a bit of a challenge, and I hope that the RLTP kind of makes up for that a little bit, and I just encourage anyone to submit if you haven't already. And I sort of just to expand upon that just a little bit, I think the picture isn't really about large-scale CapEx investments as much as, even looking at things like OpEx investments, things like how can we expand a bus network into a community that doesn't have one? We don't really have a process for that necessarily. How can we up frequencies? How can we make public transport cheaper for students, for disabled Aucklanders, for community service card holders? They can make real differences in the lives of people in terms of their transport and their bottom line budgets as well. I'm just hoping that we hear this loud and clear through the submissions processes. Just finally, while I have the floor, I do want to thank the team for looking at the Northwest Busway and the focus provided there, because it's absolutely crucial for 150,000 plus Aucklanders that suffer a substandard level of service. That's still a huge difference positively for my community that we still love, but we don't love getting off at motorway off-ramps. So we've got to fix that one quickly. And I just really thank the team as well for that focus. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for the councillors who spoke there. I think there's some good points being brought up. This is an iterative process, and we need to try and capture the things that we think are relevant. And as the Mayor has said, there's a scope here for elected people to be driving parts of that. So I think there's been some worthwhile suggestions put on the table that can certainly be picked up in the workshop and in the next meeting of the Transport and Infrastructure when it comes back. Okay, it's been moved, it's been seconded. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, we move on. We're going to have a quick break, just a couple of minutes break to let people just stretch their legs a little bit, and then we'll move on to item 9 in a couple of minutes' time. So if you want to just get up and walk around, please do, and then we'll continue with time of use charging, which is the next item.